And a happy Monday to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. We are once again entering another quiet stretch of weather as we start another work week, the last full work week before we get into the shortened work week next week for the Thanksgiving holiday. So not too much to talk about weather-wise besides a little bit of bouncing around with your temperatures, but also we can always find something to talk about. And as of the beginning of this week, we are starting it out with a fire danger statement. So we have talked about this over the last couple of weeks, but today this fire danger statement a little bit different because it goes for all of the FFC, which is the Peachtree City National Weather Service office. It goes for all of the forecasting counties. So this goes for all of North Georgia, West Georgia, Northeast Georgia, and down here into Central Georgia. So you will see every county that we have encompassed in this fire danger statement. This comes in light of relative humidity being less than 25% this afternoon and evening. This just means it's a very dry environment out there. We do have a bit of a breeze out of the northwest, maybe around 5 to 10 miles per hour. That's not necessarily widespread, but you don't necessarily need the winds in order to get this issued. And we have dry vegetation. So those are three ingredients that lead to quite literally prime fuel to the fire if any of those are to spark in the wilderness. So any fires that can develop, they could spread very rapidly, and outdoor burning is going to be strongly discouraged. And I will tell you, you will want to avoid maybe some of those controlled burns throughout today. We already have a report just up here to the east of Dalton, east of I-75 in Murray County, Georgia, right on the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, of a widespread brush fire that we've received some helicopter or some kind of aerial imagery from that we've seen in the National Weather Service chat. So that one is fairly widespread. We had a report of a brush fire in Jones County as of last Thursday. And this typically happens quite frequently this time of year. When you get into the fall season, it is one of our drier time periods of the calendar year. So we don't have as much rainfall, and typically you can fall into some dry or drought conditions very easily. And number two, with the passage of our fronts, because they do usher in a whole lot of drier air behind them. And that's why we typically see some clear conditions like what are currently present over Central Georgia after the passage of one of those boundaries. But they also can create windy conditions, which we saw mainly yesterday afternoon. The winds have very thankfully subsided as we're heading into the first part of the work week today. But winds northwest about 5 to 10 miles per hour. It doesn't take much of a breeze in order to sprout these fire danger statements. Just a little bit of a breeze can cause some form of burning to get out of control very fastly. But as of recently, you know, it's been a very dry stretch of weather. We continue to show you this drought monitor each and every week. It gets updated. And as of right now, all of Central Georgia still remains in a moderate drought with patches of a severe drought stretching into our western counties, our southwestern counties, and over here to the east and the southeast. So portions of Johnson County, Emmanuel County, down into Trutland, Montgomery, Wheeler, and over back into Toombs County, all under portions of a severe drought. And then if you go down here, take a trip down I-75, portions of Crisp County, Wilcox County, and Toombs County are under a severe drought, along with the western portion of Taylor County and western portion of Upson County. Even a patch of an extreme drought up here in Pike County, Georgia, and part of that might stretch over into Spalding County, but just to the northwest of us, that's where you're getting really close to actually the Peachtree City area and Fayetteville up there in Fayette County. But this is as of November 11th. We haven't received any rain throughout the entire month of November, so these drought conditions are very likely to worsen by the time we get an update this week on Thursday. It will take all the data up until tomorrow, and then we'll get the release of it on Thursday. So we're going to continue to keep you updated with that and what implications that is going to have in terms of backyard gardens, your lawn, and of course those fire danger statements, which typically we do get issued on some days that we have some form of a widespread breeze, and that is looking to be the case once again. In terms of your actual weather, I did allude to it. It is a very calm stretch of weather, but we are kicking off the work week with a slight cool down, and that cool down is going to be in air quotes because it's still going to be a pleasantly warm afternoon, nowhere near the cool temperatures that we had at this time last week, and that issued our weather impact alert, that first hard freeze of the fall season. But if you were enjoying the weather that we had present this weekend, high temperatures around the 80-degree mark, we'll be back in the 80s in no time as soon as Wednesday, and that's actually looking to round out the work week when finally we have some better rain chances as we go Friday into Saturday. We'll go over what we're expecting for our next rainmaker here in central Georgia. But no signs of that rainmaker right now. We can see some high-level clouds off in the distance over to the west. This is looking at the west gate in the westerly direction at the Georgia National Fairgrounds. Looks like the winds might have picked up very slightly. You can see the flags waving on occasion, but overall it's been a story of pretty calm winds throughout most of the morning. Downtown Dublin, nice and dry, clear blue sky as we look over, I believe this is in the northwesterly direction. And then we go over here into Warner Robins, where once again we get a glimpse of those higher level clouds as we look off to the west. But something else worth noting, I've actually noticed it quite frequently in downtown Dublin, and it's actually crazy the progress we've seen of a lot of the leaves falling over here in some of these trees. Take a look at that bright yellow color with all of these leaves and some of these Dublin trees. And then we have this one tree right here, which I noticed last week. Almost all the leaves are completely fallen off of that tree right there, and you can see them scattered about these grassy areas. And then over here in Warner Robins, these trees have very beautiful color right over there by the Central Georgia Technical College campus. Obviously don't have too many trees up here in the downtown Macon area, but a lot of them are going to be of the evergreen variety. Maybe this one right here, some of these over here are going to be more so the ones that we do see that start to shed their leaves. I think they're called deciduous trees, if you will, going back to my 8th grade biome unit in biology. Taking a look at your temperatures, because that's a big factor. It was a chilly morning this morning with plenty of values that got as low as the mid-30s. We've seen a pretty substantial increase. Your numbers are now sitting in the low 60s and maybe at the warmest a 65 or a 66 that we can spot in Dublin, Swainsboro, and down to Vidalia. But 66 looks like it takes the cake for our warmest temperature. How does that match up against many of our neighboring states? Well, into the 70s already in areas like New Orleans, over into Mississippi, 77 in Houston, 79 in Laredo. That is going to be the warmest temperature that we can spot. Once again, we're deep into the fall season. Areas to the north of us are going to be a whole lot cooler this time of year. But if we are to get a very powerful frontal boundary, that is going to result in some of those blue colors stretching down into the state of Georgia. We can see them as far south as the the southern Appalachians, in western North Carolina. Maybe a couple areas of that blue color stretching into North Georgia. And of course, the Rocky Mountains over there on the left side of your screen. Very, very cold, a deep dark blue color over there. Now let's take a look at your dew point temperatures, and we've had our fair share of maybe some slightly warmer mornings, specifically really yesterday morning where we started out somewhere in the low 50s. And that was in part because we got an increase in the moisture content. So when these dew point temperatures do continue to rise, your actual temperatures will not fall below them, but we have gotten a reinforcing push of drier air behind the passage of yesterday's frontal boundary. So your dew point temperatures are now scattered about the 20s and the low 30s. So it is a very dry environment, hence why we do have that fire danger statement for very low relative humidity values. And all across the southeast, it doesn't look like we're alone in this. Many areas of Alabama are very dry. South Carolina are very dry. You have to go down on the Atlantic coast of Florida to find some shades of light green, and back over to the southwest of us into southern Mississippi, the Mobile Bay area in southern Alabama, and of course on the toe of the boot in Louisiana. Winds and wind gusts, this is a big factor. Even though we don't have widespread shades of blue, maybe a steady breeze of about 5 to 10 miles per hour, exactly what was outlined in that fire danger statement. Maybe 6 to 7, maybe even 9 miles per hour across areas like Warner Robins, Cochran, and Butler. Right now, these winds have mainly an easterly component to them, but you can see that they're coming down from the north just to the northwest of us. So the winds are going to vary in direction throughout today, but overall, you're going to notice maybe an occasional breeze on some portions of today. I do expect it to be a relatively calm day in terms of the winds, which is going to be a good thing for our fire danger statement. But at the same time, you do want to avoid any controlled burning that you can have. So let's break down yesterday's almanac piece by piece, because these averages are going to be very important as we go throughout the next couple of days. 53 yesterday for a morning low temperature, one of the warmest mornings we've had in quite some time. In fact, that went 11 degrees above average of your low of 42 degrees, where we're normally sitting around this time of year. And 80 degrees, that is definitely not feeling like fall whatsoever. Quite the temperature swing we saw from last Tuesday all the way into the end of the weekend. That's a spread of 55 degrees between your highest temperature we recorded last week and your lowest temperature. But 80 degrees is 11 degrees, also above average this time of year. Well above average, not just by a few degrees, but by 10, 11, maybe even 12 degrees if some areas topped out at 81 yesterday. And in fact, we're flirting with records. 84 for your record high temperature yesterday back in 1958. So we were 4 degrees shy of matching that record. And 22, your morning low temperature. I don't think we're going to have to worry about breaking any records in this low temperature department for the foreseeable future, which is good because we've already broken a morning low record as of the last week. Let's keep the very cold air out of the picture for quite some time. Enjoy at least some pleasantly warm afternoons. This last little bit of a taste of warmer weather that we're very likely to get as we transition into winter, which in fact will be kicking off in 34 days. So just a little over a month until we transition into the start of winter. But no rain in the entire month of November so far. So obviously your year departure of rain has continued to steadily decrease. It's got a positive in front of it still, but it's right now just below 1 inch above where we should be at this point of the calendar year. So without anything in the way of rain, we are going to continue to watch that number steadily go down. But we do have a chance at least some widespread rain as we head into the weekend. Hopefully we can at least put a little bit of a dent in that, although your rain chances aren't looking too promising. Sunrise yesterday, 7:06, so that sunrise continues to get later and later after we had that time change and it went back before the 7 a.m. hour. Now it's a couple minutes past the exact top of the hour at 7 a.m. and sunset 5:33 p.m. So sunset continuing to get earlier and earlier. In fact, it will do so over the course of the next 2 weeks. 5:27 p.m. is going to be our earliest sunset, and that is expected to happen starting on December 1st for a good stretch of about 4 or 5 days before it starts to get later and later. And in fact, we are going to have a later sunset on the first day of winter, which is the shortest calendar day in terms of hours of daylight a couple days past the beginning of the month. Your earliest sunset is actually not going to correlate to that shortest day of the calendar year like you might think. But let's talk some numbers. For the rest of today, we will continue to climb into the upper half of the 60s, eventually right around the 70 degree mark. 71 is what the Meteorogram has us topping out at. I'm pretty confident in that number, so that's what I went with for my forecasted high. But before we talk more about that, you will see the temperature decline into the low 60s already at 6 p.m. But overall, this afternoon is going to feel absolutely amazing. If it has been too warm for your liking as of recently, maybe some type of weather that you can't necessarily keep the light pullover on for, I think today is going to be more your speed, but it is going to cool down very quickly as we head into the evening hours. I imagine we're down into the upper 50s as we go into 7 p.m. And of course, if you're staying out a little bit later tonight, it is going to be very chilly, say around the 10 to 11 p.m. hour, because tomorrow morning is going to be our last cool period before we begin a steady warming trend throughout the rest of your work week. So 71 for a high temperature today. I did just tell you I agree with the Meteorogram for a change. It's because we did get the passage of that frontal boundary. So your temperatures aren't going to warm up as much as they possibly could for this time of year. We are still feeling the impacts of that slightly cooler and drier air funneling in behind the dry frontal boundary from yesterday. So slightly cooler, but take that with a grain of salt. This is still going to be above average for this time of year. It's saying something if we've had the passage of a frontal boundary, and I'm talking about cooler air getting ushered in, and we still see these numbers above where we should be of 69 degrees this time of year. That's just telling you how warm it has been and how much above average that we have been. And this afternoon forecasted to be the coolest of the next 7 days. We're going to have a whole stretch of not only some mid and upper 70s, but definitely some low 80s in the near future. Way too warm for this time of year, in my personal opinion. Satellite and radar picture. It is crystal clear. I promise you this is the actual image right now. We just don't see anything in the way of cloud cover or any of that backscatter according to that current satellite and radar picture. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I did just get a notification from the National Weather Service. We do have a radar outage right now, so probably doing some updating with the system to our radar over there in Jeffersonville. I imagine that will pop back online as we go into the afternoon hours, but it's a perfect time to do so and get all that maintenance done because we just don't have anything in the way of rain chances really over the next couple of days. Satellite and radar does show plenty of cloud cover back over into Mississippi and Alabama. Remember when we were taking a look at those sky cams, I was saying off to the west you could get a glimpse of some higher level cloud cover, and that's more than likely what we were just getting an image of, but it could be a little bit closer to home. We would get a better idea of that if we actually could see our radar in use. So here's a look at your surface map. There's the frontal boundary that came through yesterday. It has kind of stalled down to the south of us, but I imagine it's probably a little bit farther to the south down into Florida as of this current hour. This was as of this morning, but overall it still paints the same picture. High pressure to the northwest of us over into western Illinois. That's going to continue to slide to the east, and that high pressure center is going to create a very dry environment for us over the next couple of days. We do see that this frontal boundary is attached to a warm front kind of on the forward side of that low pressure center back up into northern Colorado, southern Wyoming, and there is a trailing cold front attached to that low pressure center. So if that continues to slide over to the east, that cold front could be our next weather maker, but it does look like it's going to take some time before we actually see the impacts of some form of another weather system. There's a look at future view. Not much we're talking about whatsoever. The only talking points that I really have are going to be number one, today and tomorrow. Mostly sunny days, almost completely sunny days, and that's going to lead to a steady warm up. There's no signs of really any approaching weather systems. But then as we go into Wednesday, a slight increase in the cloud cover, and along with that, we could have a few isolated showers that are present in a select few areas as we go throughout the midway point of the work week. Not too much confidence in you seeing anything in the way of rain, but I have elected to actually include a rain chance as we go into Wednesday, which you will see on this next 3 days graphic. So first things first, we'll talk about the temperatures, and then we'll talk about why I have thrown a rain chance on Wednesday. But 71 for that high today, down to the upper 30s as we start out tomorrow morning. Typically, the second night after the passage of a frontal boundary is going to be your coolest. So we had night one last night where we had a temperature of 40 degrees, which I'm pretty sure we went well below this morning in downtown Macon. So I do expect virtually the same, maybe about a degree or two lower in terms of your morning lows as you walk outside tomorrow. Obviously, stuff the truck. That's been a big talking point that we've had as of recently. We will be kicking that off tomorrow on Columbia Street, the Walmart on Columbia Street in downtown Milledgeville. So if you are planning on going out during the morning hours before you head out to work, before you're dropping the kids off at school, it is going to be chilly. So make sure that you're bundling up. But if you have plans to go in the afternoon, it is going to be pleasant. 76 degrees for a high temperature. Maybe we pair that up with a little bit of a breeze. That would be even more immaculate weather. But mostly sunny skies and no rain chances for the first day of Stuff the Truck. Can't remember the last time we've had Stuff the Truck with such an amazing looking forecast, but obviously 38 degrees. That's still pretty cold as you go into the morning hours. Now we transition into Wednesday, our second day of Stuff the Truck, which we will be at the Walmart in Dublin. You do see that 10% there, and that rain chance is not just for Dublin. That is going to be for the entirety of central Georgia. I just wanted to include the labels about which locations we're going to be out at for Stuff the Truck each of Tuesday, Wednesday, and then once this graphic advances into tomorrow, we'll throw Macon and Warner Robins on there for Thursday. But notice the difference in your morning low temperature, 49 degrees as we kickstart Wednesday morning. That's because we are going to get a bit of a moisture uptick. Remember what I was just saying, as your dew point temperatures increase, your actual temperatures cannot fall below those dew point temperatures, so they're not going to decrease as much as we go into the overnight hours, and maybe some clouds passing through during the nighttime Tuesday into Wednesday will also help keep those numbers a little bit warmer. But your afternoon high temperature, I did mention it's very quick to rebound. We are back in the 80s, and not only the 80s, the low 80s. 82 would be warmer than any day we've seen over virtually the last month, I think, in central Georgia. I'll have to go back and do some research on that. But 82 degrees for a high temperature, there is no need for some layering as you go into the day on Wednesday. It may still be a bit chilly for your liking in the morning hours, but overall, I do believe 49 is going to feel a world's difference as compared to the mid and upper 30s that we had this morning and that are very likely looking to be in store as you walk outside tomorrow. So your morning low temperatures, they bounce up near 50 degrees as we go into Wednesday. They don't even stop there. We're into the low and mid 50s both Thursday and Friday mornings as we round out the work week. Your average low this time of year, 42 degrees. It looks like tomorrow is going to be the last day that is below average with your morning low temperatures. A very quick cool down, and then we are going to start to see a very quick warm up and a very quick uptick in the moisture content. But your afternoon high temperatures, they don't get too much farther than that 82-degree mark, very thankfully, but they are still scattered about the low 80s as we round out the work week Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your average high, 69 degrees this time of year. If we hit 83 on Thursday, that is good enough for 14 degrees above average. Way too warm for this time of year, but after how cold we were at the beginning of last week, I think it's definitely a welcome trade-off that many of you are going to welcome in with open arms. But I did mention the uptick in the moisture content, and that is going to be a big influence on our forecast, but also for our rain chances. We're only looking at a couple of pop-up showers, maybe even just a sprinkle in a select few areas. I think there is a much greater likelihood that you go the entirety of Wednesday without seeing anything in the way of rain. But we do see the dew point temperatures really increase very drastically. It's been a while since we've seen an increase in the humidity like this. Your dew point temperatures are somewhere in the 40s or even lower than that as we go into Tuesday afternoon, but we bounce all the way back up into the 60s, so starting to get some of that light green color back on the dew point temperatures map, and we do see the moisture content peaking somewhere right there in the lower 60s, but that is a good enough humid environment, especially when you pair it up with temperatures in the 80s. Remember what we talked about all the time in the summertime months? You have very warm numbers, say, in the mid-90s. We have a very muggy atmosphere. You can't have that convective-like atmosphere, so that rising motion. Warm air rises, cool air sinks. Remember that science lesson back in 8th grade? So that warmer air, as it rises from the surface, it's picking up whatever moisture that we have at the surface, and that is going to condense and form into clouds. However, it's not going to be as rampant in the activity that we would see in the summertime because we saw a very humid atmosphere. We saw much warmer temperatures, but it's going to be a decent enough environment for a very similar setup to what we would have during a summertime day. And the rain is just going to be a lot lighter in nature. We don't have as much moisture to continue to lift up as we would, say, with dew point temperatures in the 70s, maybe in the 80s. That's why in the summertime you get those pop-up thunderstorms, maybe even some severe thunderstorms, but we're simply just looking at a couple of pop-up sprinkles here and there on Wednesday and Thursday. Now we go into Friday. It does look like we get a bit of a downtick in the humidity, but this is kind of anyone's best guess right now. The farther and farther out that you go on the smuggy meter, things do get a little more uncertain, but keep this in mind. We are generally expecting some slightly lower humidity as we go into Friday and into Saturday, but Saturday we do see a bit of a secondary peak, and that's when our next rain chances arrive. So here's your long-range models going into Thursday afternoon. This is 5 p.m. Plenty of active weather to the west, to the north of us, and it does look like we start to see a bit of an increase in the cloud cover, and that's going to help bump the morning low temperatures up just a little bit more. But then we go into Friday night, and both models are seemingly hinting at least a couple of scattered showers moving into the near vicinity of us. But I do think that most of the rain that does occur, as of right now, the timing is really looking like overnight Friday into early morning on Saturday. So that's where we will see the best coverage of rain going into your Saturday morning right there around the 7 a.m. hour. But the good news with that is it's a welcome trade-off. If we welcome in those rain chances in the morning hours, then it does look like this system moves out by the time you're wrapping up your Saturday. So Saturday afternoon and evening plans are still looking good to go as of right now, but we still have a little bit of fine-tuning to do with this forecast as we get closer. I would go ahead and plan on at least having the rain gear ready to go, especially if you're heading out the door somewhere on Saturday morning, maybe going out to a breakfast, a brunch, going to get your morning coffee before you get all the festivities for the weekend going, and then we transition into the end of the weekend, crystal clear as we wrap it up on Sunday. And if this is in the form of a frontal boundary, we can get some cooler and drier air into the forecast. So that will help bump the numbers down just a little bit as we roll into the beginning of that shortened work week for Thanksgiving week next week. The long range models go as far out as Monday at 4 p.m. And I'll talk about what I'm seeing just generally right now as we get into Thanksgiving. But once we get into the end of the work week, I can give you a bit of a better look at that first look at your Turkey Day forecast. Right now, Future View shows rain chances may be moving in around 8 p.m. on Friday. Now, once again, take this with a grain of salt. This is just kind of to give you a general idea, and this is according to the GFS model, so that green shade we just saw on the last graphic. If we go the GFS route here, it does look like we could see some totals in between 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, but they're definitely looking like better rainfall totals up to the north of us and back over to the west in Alabama. Not looking like we're lucking out with much rain according to this model, but let's see what the European says. I did throw a pause point pretty early during the midweek actually, because these are a couple of those isolated showers I was referring to that could occur all throughout the day on Wednesday. It's going to be in some localized areas, so like I said, do not go counting on rain. And just because we do see a bit of a green patch popping up in Monroe County, Bibb County, do not think that it is exactly going to rain sometime around 4, 5, 6 o'clock in these specific areas. No, this is just a generalized prediction. This isn't the highest resolution that we can get. But then when we actually get that widespread rainmaker, it's looking like 3 a.m. The overnight hours Friday into early Saturday morning is when we start to get some better rainfall totals. And it does look widespread. But once again, these totals are not impressive. They're not really going to do anything for our drought conditions. Only about 1/10 of an inch at the very most of rain in a select few areas, maybe Milledgeville, Macon, Dublin. Once again, don't get locked into those locations getting this exact amount of rain. But we do have the potential for at least some widespread light scattered showers is what I'm seeing, and I don't really think most of them are going to hold together. So obviously not much going on weather-wise across the United States besides that potential rainmaker Friday night into Saturday morning. Do we have anything out there in the tropics? Because we're still not at the end of hurricane season. We are approaching about the last 2 weeks of it. Hurricane season will end on November 30th. Still not expecting any activity in the next 7 days. We still have yet to see any areas of potential development since Hurricane Melissa did form down in the Caribbean, eventually moved through the northern Caribbean, the Bahamas, and way up into the North Atlantic Ocean. So it has been very quiet in the tropics, but it does make sense. This time of year during hurricane season is typically not too active. So our numbers, I really think this is what we're going to have for final totals for this year's hurricane season. 13 named storms, which is 1 below average, but 4 storms shy of what was forecasted by Colorado State, 5 of which have formed into hurricanes, so 2 below average, and 4 storms once again below what Colorado State forecasted. However, of those 5 hurricanes, 4 of them have been major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher, and of those 4 major hurricanes, 3 of them have gained Category 5 status. Of course, Hurricane Melissa being the strongest out of any of them and impacting western Jamaica at its official peak strength. So that actually puts us right on par with what Colorado State forecasted, and that's 1 major hurricane above what we typically see on average. So depending on which way you sway it or look at it, this year's hurricane season could be classified as above average in terms of major hurricanes, but in terms of actual frequency of named storms and hurricanes, we're below average and we are well below the numbers that were forecasted for this year, but never necessarily a bad thing. We will always be thankful if we have a less than active tropic season, and we hadn't had any storms make an official landfall here in the United States, with the exception of Tropical Storm Chantal, but it didn't make landfall as a hurricane. It made landfall as a tropical storm, so obviously didn't see as many impacts as last year's hurricane season. Like I said, that is never going to be a bad thing. So Stuff the Truck happening Tuesday through Thursday. This is probably the best weather I've seen in my now 3rd year of helping out and doing this fundraiser. We've had our chilly mornings, we've had some rain chances, we've sent our reporters out there, meteorologists out there. They've needed the raincoat, they've needed the puffer coat. Well, I think tomorrow morning we're definitely going to bundle up for it, but then after that it's going to feel very pleasant, even borderline pretty warm on Wednesday and Thursday. You'll probably very likely see us out there in some shorts and our short sleeve polos as opposed to the big heavy puffer coats that we had last year. 10% chance of seeing an isolated sprinkle throughout the day in Dublin and all over central Georgia, but I think we have a far greater likelihood of staying dry through the entirety of your Wednesday. But we may pick up those 10% chances of rain on Thursday as well. We'll get a better idea when FutureView shows that on the short range models. Then rain chances starting later on Friday night. I'm gaining a little more confidence on the timing of this being Friday overnight into early Saturday morning, but I just elected to throw the rain chances on the general days for right now. If I see more and more agreement this time tomorrow, then I'll go ahead and put some actual time labels on your Friday and Saturday rain chances. But I do believe the back half of Saturday evening into the night, and all the way through your Sunday are going to see clearer conditions, and it does look like we have some slightly cooler air coming into the forecast. 78 down to 75 as we go into Sunday, and hopefully those numbers will drop into the low 70s as we kick off the work week next week. Not looking like a substantial cool down, but of course a lot of eyes are going to be on Thanksgiving. My general thinking, just looking at some of the models, when we do see some cooler temperatures, It is looking like the weekend after Thanksgiving is going to be a chillier weekend, so that makes me think that we could have another frontal boundary around the midweek next week. That could make for a bit of a wet turkey day. It's far from set in stone. This is just kind of a general prediction from what I've seen with some extended models and of course with some of the mediagrams. So that's something we'll be on the lookout for. But until then, smooth sailing in the weather department, plenty of sunshine, a few rain chances, but mainly just plan to have that rain jacket ready to go Friday night into Saturday morning. That'll do it for your extended forecast for this Monday. We'll have another updated look at it tomorrow at 11 a.m.